So hello everyone and welcome to the November 2024 and final edition of Fiction Fix Online. As I say, due to a technical error, we aren't able to live stream this event again today, but we are recording it to post later. And it will go onto the Finger on the Pulse, which is the Facebook group for Fiction Fix Online, and also on my Helen Claire Gould channel on YouTube. So please subscribe and point all your friends towards it. Okay. If you wish to join the Finger on the Pulse, please ask to do so or message me on Facebook to ask for an invitation. You would need to be a friend. I think most of you are in it anyway. There are a few rules to review and some questions to answer, but the group is both for readers and listeners, and it will continue to function as a page for writing and publishing related posts. At our Fiction Fix live events, we used to have a books table. We can't do that with Fiction Fix Online, but for our authors, if you're reading this afternoon, please post your book details in the chat. Include your website along with the link to the ebook and the sellers for the printed version. But prices would be helpful. And if you have an ISBN and or ASIN, if you have it, please show that. And also on Kindle, the link should take readers straight to the book if at all possible. So this can be done at the end or at any time during the show while you're not reading. And I will post all the details with the live stream and video or in the comments below it as appropriate for the platform. Some of them you can post, I think YouTube, you can post as part of the posting anyway, and some things you have to post in the comments afterwards. If you hear something you really like, there's a reactions thing, so it should come up. Oh, let's play the chime for raised hands. There's a reactions thing at the bottom, and you could do clapping or thumbs up or a heart even, or something like that, you know, if you really like something. Oh, well, and basically, obviously we'd like you to clap before and afterwards. Yeah. It's okay. Right, so today we have a bumper edition, although one of our ladies couldn't actually make it, so Dale is standing in for her instead, so that should be fine. But we've got 7 readings instead of the usual 6, and 6 out of the 7 are returning guest readers, 3 of whom are based in the US and the remaining 4 are based in the UK. And our missing lady, lady writer, is a Fiction Fix newbie. So, but anyway, yeah. So please unmute everybody as we open the show with our first author, Carol, writing as Carol Kerry Green. Her latest book is Flight of the Falcon, an urban fantasy offering. So please welcome Carol back to Fiction Fix Online and into the limelight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah. Right. Hopefully you can hear me now. So I've unmuted. Yeah, good. Thanks, Helen. So yes, I'm going to be reading from Flight of the Falcon. I haven't got paperback copies yet, but that's the cover that you can vaguely see on my Kindle. But it's on the Amazon, and I'll just, when I get a chance to find the chat, I will put it in the chat when I've finished reading.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to read from the beginning of chapter 3. And I'm reading this this is from the point of view of, I've got 2 characters, Hugh and Falcon. And this is from the point of view of Hugh. Sorry, it's chapter 4, not chapter 3. Right, Hugh has been kidnapped, and He's in York at the moment, which is the city of York in Yorkshire, in England, not far from where I live. And I lived there for a couple of years. So I knew quite a lot about the area, but I did go and visit and do some research. So anyway, so Hugh's been kidnapped. He's been kept in an attic in an old house. Right. Hugh was pacing 6 steps to the door, turn, 6 steps to the window, then 6 more steps back to the wall where the bed was, on repeat. He'd lost count of the number of times he'd repeated his route after he became aware that he was being watched through the window. On the ledge, on the other side of the barred window, sat 3 birds, a robin, a blackbird, and a crow. They all watched him, their heads cocked to one side. Hugh was freaked out. When did birds act like that in synchronization? He shook his head, convinced he was still affected by the blow he'd taken earlier. He closed his eyes and then opened them again. The 3 birds were still there. He moved closer to the window. He'd looked at it when he'd first been shown into the attic, looking for a way out. Beyond the window were overgrown gardens and a boundary wall, upon which sat about 20 more birds, all different sizes and species. Weird. Looking further, he could see they were on the top of a rise, and he could just make out the woods around the property. They were in the countryside somewhere, but he didn't think it was too far from York, as they hadn't been in the Land Rover that long. Some of the birds took off from the boundary wall, and others appeared to take their place. The 3 on the window ledge continued to watch him, heads cocked. There was a noise at the door, and Hugh turned towards it. One of Swills's goons entered and smirked at Hugh. In his hand he held a taser. Hugh swallowed. He'd been tased before, and it hadn't been a pleasant experience. Mr. Swills wants to see you, the goon gestured with the taser for Hugh to go in front of him, before shoving him roughly down 2 flights of stairs. Hugh barely managed to keep his feet under him. Then he was propelled into a side room, where Swills was sitting, drinking tea at the table. Ah, Hugh, so glad you could join us. Swills gestured to the other side of the table, but Hugh shook his head. The goon shoved him in the back, so Hugh moved over reluctantly and sat down. Thank you, Bentley. Swills motioned for the other man to go stand by the door. Hugh knew the taser could still reach him from there, so he kept a wary eye on him. What's going on, Swales? Why the kidnapping? He asked. You weren't doing your job. Falcon Bear should have been dead by now. Hugh looked at him in confusion. The job had been to keep an eye on Falcon and find out if he was involved in what had happened to the Goodkin family, not to take him out. That was never in my instructions, he protested. No, I seem to recall telling you to take the initiative. That doesn't mean to kill someone. He roared, half getting out of his seat. Bentley moved forward menacingly, and Hugh sat back down. You're mad. Swales just sipped his tea, buttered a crumpet, and took a bite out of it. After swallowing, he gave his attention to Hugh once more. No, I think the word you're looking for is psychopath, he said calmly. Hugh blinked and looked at his boss. This was so weird. Though he didn't know Swales that well, he could swear that he was dealing with a completely different person. His eyes narrowed as he really looked at the man sitting across from him. You're not Robert Swales, he declared finally. Give the man a prize. Not Swales gave him a slow clap. Took you long enough. I thought you were the best. Hugh shook his head in disbelief. What was going on here? Who are you then? He asked. Ian Swales, at your service. Well, not really. He giggled. Giggled? Hugh was beginning to think the man was deranged. You're Robert's brother. Twin, actually, the other man answered. Don't worry. Robert is perfectly well. He's having a well-deserved rest at a secure and restful sanatorium. The staff have been told he's under the impression he's Robert, when he's actually Ian. You have no words. The man was certifiably mad. What do you want? He decided to try and get to the bottom of what was happening. I want you to kill Falcon Bird. Why? He's in my way. That's not a good enough reason to kill him. I'm not doing your dirty work for you. You will kill him, Ian roared, launching himself out of his seat and clearing the table with a sweep of his arm. No, you can't make me. Ian grinned. He gestured to Bentley, who, without warning, shot Hugh with the taser. Hugh gasped and arched his body as he felt the electricity shoot through him. He slipped off the chair until he was lying beside it in a sprawl. Put him back in the attic, Ian said, back to acting like the suave man he'd appeared to be at first. I need to get back to the office and catch up with little Imogen. Hugh felt blackness surround him. No, he whispered, trying to speak. Leave. What was that? Ian smiled at him as he stepped over Hugh and headed for the door. A couple of moments later, Bentley picked him up and slung him over his shoulder. Hugh hung there, swearing inside. He'd not recovered enough from being tasered yet to take Bentley down. All he could do was hang there and moan. Bentley unceremoniously dumped him on bed in the attic room, and Hugh sprawled there. He tried to turn over and groaned as his limbs began to come back online. Pins and needles made their way down his arms and legs, and he shuddered. He hated being helpless like this. His mind was churning. He'd not known that Robert Swirls had a twin brother. He'd never heard of Ian before. Robert had obviously kept that close to his chest. He groaned again as he turned over, pulling himself up to sit against the headboard. He managed to grab the glass of water that he'd left on the bedside cabinet. He took a grateful sip of water before putting it back down again. As he turned his head, he noticed that there were still 3 birds lined upon his windowsill, though they were different from earlier. This time, there's a pigeon, a swallow, and a blackbird, all watching him with their heads cocked to one side. What the hell was going on? Feeling the effects of the taser still running through his system, Hugh gave in to exhaustion and fell asleep on the bed. A couple of hours later, he awoke to hear loud noise sounding like things crashing together. He shot off the bed, grateful his body felt okay again. He could hear shouting and more noises, but then it all went quiet. Quickly, he looked around the room for anything he could use as a weapon. He wasn't sure what was going on, but he'd rather be prepared than not. There were sounds on the stairs, and then the door was thrust open. Hugh tensed, ready to attack Bentley or another of Swirls' goons, when, to his surprise, Falcon Bird came through the door. He drew back his fist just in time to avoid hitting the other man in the face. Falcon looked at him and smiled. Good to see you in one piece. Hugh shook his head. Hugh, that was Imogen's voice. How was she here? Oh, thank God you're okay, she said as she entered the room, flinging herself into his arms. He held her close, feeling her trembling as they hugged tightly. Sorry, she mumbled into his chest. It's been a hard couple of days. Thank you. That's as far as I'll go today.
Okay, please unmute now and let's hear it again for Carol Kerry Green and Flight of the Falcon. So Carol, I know that your book came out quite recently.
Yeah, end of
October.
end of October, beginning of November, yeah.
I thought it was October, yeah.
Yeah.
And I noticed that you were posting little sort of hints, mysterious little hints and question marks on Facebook. So where did you get the idea for those from?
It's just what I've seen sort of other authors I know do. Often, because I mean, as you all know, like marketing is one of the hardest things we do as authors.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
And I found that if I share little bits on my group or page or whatever, people then do become interested.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work, of course, and you don't always get anything for it, but sometimes people will come back and say, "Ah, that was interesting." So yeah,
that was an interesting technique,
yeah,
a bit of fun as well.
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, and I try and do that with works in progress as well. Like I'm currently writing book 2 of the same series, again set in York, although this one's partly set in York and partly in London. And I'll, as the next few months go on, I'll be putting little bits up on my group and everything.
Yeah, great. So now we've got Pat Spencer, who is one of our American authors, reading from her latest novel. And thank you so much to everybody for muting yourself during the reading. And let's have a big hand for Pat Spencer and Sticks in a Bundle, The Early Years.
Thank you. Generally, I find public transportation to be hours of isolation, interrupted by neighborly comment or two. So that day in 2012, when I wiped the sweat from my brow and climbed aboard a repurposed school bus to travel from Johannesburg to Zimbabwe, the last thing I expected was for my seatmate to tell me a story from her life that forever changed mine. A woman toward the middle of the bus nodded at the space beside her. I took that as an invitation to sit. We exchanged names and remarks about the bus running late as I settled into a ripped vinyl seat for the dusty, bone-jarring ride. I shared with Ishal that this was my first trip to Zimbabwe, and I was looking forward to visiting the magnificent Victoria Falls and spending a few days at a wildlife rescue center. She replied, I take this bus once a year to visit my grandson, his wife, and their 3 children. When I was younger, the trip seemed easier. Now it wears me out. I nodded understandingly as she continued to tell me about her family. Her tale captivated me like no other ever has. I found it strange that while Ishalayama Methebu wrote many stories, she did not write her own. Now it is my honor to share Ishal's hopes and dreams, her heartbreaks and disappointments. To the best of my ability, I have used her words to recount her life as she told it to me. A July morning in 1972, Ilanga Safari Lodge, South Africa. My sisters and I perched on the edge of a rough-cut deck. Our skinny legs, shades of dark to light, dangled at 3 different lengths. Months had passed since the day we recognized the belly swell in Kahule. The rainy season, the time during which most mothers birth their calves, was over. For the previous 28 days, well before dawn, we had taken up our post, hoping to witness this arrival. We were not about to miss it by sleeping in. Mist rising from the watering hole softened our view. The only sound was our breath as we filled our lungs with sweet, earthy smells. My sisters leaned against me. The warmth of their arms touching mine warded off the chill, yet I quivered when a lion roared deep in the veld. We gasped as the mother elephant stepped from the shadows. A single ray of sun cut through the branches of the marula tree and illuminated her newborn as he stretched his trunk to grasp her spindly tail. My sisters and I continued this early morning ritual, watching mother and baby strengthen their bond until apartheid broke ours apart. Chapter 1, The Early Years. My story began long before my sisters and I took up our vigil on the rough-cut deck, watching elephants trample belly-high tufted grasses as they approached the watering hole, and well before the idyllic years we spent at Ilanga Safari Lodge. My tale began with my birth in 1961 in the township of Soweto, South Africa. Like most young children, I listened to the stories my parents and other relatives told of my early years, yet I have no memories of my own until the 10th of January, the second Sunday of the first month of 1966. Perhaps I remember what happened so vividly because this was the first time I experienced shame, even though my heart told me it was wrong to feel that way. While still a mere 5 years old, I believe what happened that day changed the course of my life. My mother, 2 sisters, and I left our shanty and strolled past the empty space where our neighbors dumped their trash. Continuing beyond the tiny yard filled with stacks of old tires to the corner where the community water hydrant stood. There we turned from our dirt alleyway onto another. My older sister Asanda and I walked side by side, each wearing our only Sunday worship dresses. Our mother Umama followed with baby sister Monel slung upon her hip. I squealed when Umama yanked me off my feet, causing me to fall in the dirt. She hissed, "Shh, Eschild, police, act like a servant's child." I knew how a servant acted because Umama worked in a household for a white lady in Johannesburg. I scrambled to my feet and hung my head as if ashamed of whatever I'd done wrong. Asanda hurried forward, 3 paces ahead of us. That evening, I showed Umama the angry red streaks her fingernails left on my arm. Isha, I've told you many times, white police don't abide blacks who walk too close to whites. When I asked why, she answered impatiently, "You're too young to worry about the differences in people's skin. Just do as I say and be thankful I saved you from those policemen arresting you and locking you up in a prison cell." A prison full of 5-year-olds? I craved to know more, but my mother's rising eyebrow and squinty-eyed glare silenced me. That night, humiliated by Umama yanking me to the ground and angry over the large brown stain on my Sunday dress, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. This was my first lesson in how apartheid makes a person think badly of themselves. It also became the first memory I have of my own. But since my mother turned family situations and tragedies into Kwimaglu, legends passed through generations, I also remembered events that occurred before my birth as if I were there. My mother, Umama, was brave and respected in the township and the boss of us 3 girls, my aunties, the old woman who lived next door, and my father, although he didn't try as hard as the rest of us to meet her demands. I was in awe of my mother and craved to be like her, so I practiced on Wanel and Dinga, the mangy stray pup we claimed as our own. Emulating Umama's smoky voice, I ordered my little sister not to play with a boy who lived close to our shanty and demanded she keep her hands off my personal things. I was bright enough not to try this on my older sister, Asanda, but with Dinga, I commanded sit and stay, even though, the same as our father, that dog came and left as he pleased. I also learned my mother attracted men, whether walking the dirt path along our row of shanties or shopping at the street market. Men found reasons to trail behind her. Second in line, eyes focused on her bottom, I forced my skinny hips to sway in the rhythm of hers. Still, I couldn't replicate the mysterious disturbance roiling inside her skirt. I begged my older sister to read aloud from the book she brought home from her Catholic school. I believe my mother's swagger gave her the same power as the Pied Piper, and I wanted it for myself. But my older sister Asanda cautioned, "Ishile, it's not safe for you or me to let rats tag along after us." I peered down my nose, as best I could, given the subject of my disdain stood 3 inches taller than I, exaggerated my sway, then proudly marched outside. In my mind, I looked exactly like Umama. My sister acted so smart, but I knew more than she realized because when the women gathered every Friday night around the smoking brazier in our yard, I hid the shadow and eavesdropped. I learned if a woman had a baby before she married, police might come to her home and arrest her. Then, once wed, she'd find out her husband had more wrong with him than she ever suspected. Yet a woman's biggest problem was no matter how many times she explained proper behavior, their husbands rarely got it right, and that made the women very tired. I pledged to remember what the women said and write an instruction book for men once I learned more words. Little did I anticipate this book would not be well received. Still, it didn't get me in as much trouble as the articles I wrote in my later years. Thank you. And this is the cover of Sticks in the Bundle, the early years.
It's a really nice cover, actually, and very distinctive style.
My brand new cover designer lives over there with you UK guys. He's in the UK.
Oh,
It's
right.
Simon Howe, and he owns wordhook.com, and he's amazing, and he's really reasonable. I mean, but he's so talented and so patient to put up with non-techies like me.
Okay, I was just going to ask, Pat. So this is a series of novels, isn't it? Is it going to be 2, 3, 4?
3. It's a
Three.
trilogy. So
Yeah.
there's 3. Yes.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
the second one came out 2 days ago, and
Yeah.
the third one will be released on December 15th.
You've been busy.
Well,
So,
I wrote them quite a long time ago, and it's
right.
just been a very long birthing process for these
Yeah.
3.
Okay, that's fair enough. And what gave you the idea for this? Because it's quite different from the other things that you've written, isn't it?
It is. And as the book says, in 2012, I was in South Africa and on a bus trip, and a woman just started telling me stories. And
Oh,
they were just amazing. It's true. I mean, amazing stories. And the bus was awful, and the trip was wonderful because of her. And I was only writing nonfiction then, and had this dream maybe someday write fiction, but it didn't occur to me that I was going to write her stories. I wrote another book first. I wrote Story of a Stolen Girl,
yeah.
but Ishile just kept sitting on my shoulders and
Reminding
nagging at
you.
me and weighing on me. And so finally, the summer of 2018, I wrote the first words of the trilogy, and now have just began publishing them.
Well, it's brilliant anyway. It's great. So,
Thank you.
yeah, so please make some more noise for Pat and Sticks in a Bundle, The Early Years.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Right. So now, next up is David, and he has a children's book. Now, David runs Sergeant Frosty Publications, which is a children's fiction publishing company. So please mute yourself during the readings, but please first give it up for David Flynn reading an extract from Sheriff Pat, Brontosaurus Cowboy.
Hello, right. This is Sheriff Pat, Brontosaurus Cowboy. The origin of this was I was talking to, I do reading with year 3s, and I asked them what did they want to hear about, and they said dinosaurs, and they said cowboys. So hence the Brontosaurus Cowboy.
It's great.
The sheriff of Bynum in Montana was a brontosaurus called Pat. Sheriff Pat the Brontosaurus, but people usually called him Mr. Garrett. He was a very, very studious brontosaurus sheriff, and he spent a lot of his time down at the local library, where he made lots of notes about history and keeping the law. No one caused any trouble in Bynum. People were friendly, and the children liked going for slides down Sheriff Pat's neck. No one annoyed Sheriff Pat. When a brontosaurus is annoyed, they stamp their feet, and they have very big feet. It's important to be friendly and nice to a brontosaurus. It's very important to be nice to everyone, of course, but especially to people who will squash you flatter than a pancake if they tread on you. Everything was nice and pleasant in Bynum, until one day a young goat came to town. He was called William, which people usually shortened to Billy. They called him Billy the Kid. Billy liked eating a lot. He would eat anything: grass, gloves, bark from tree, sandwiches, anything, even Brussels sprouts. But the thing he liked eating most, his absolute favorite thing, was paper, especially old books. Sheriff Pat had gone out of town, trying to find where one side of the river had gone. He thought it might be a bank robbery, that someone had stolen the bank. Pat spoke to some of the animals there, beavers and otters and raccoons. Although they all looked the same to him, he couldn't tell one from the otter. Mr. Beaver, who was an otter, said that he was sure that the bank wasn't far away. There was one on the other side of the river, and the missing one was bound to come back because riverbanks always stay together. Mr. Otter, who was a beaver, said that maybe he could chew a few trees and make a bank. I feel like building a dam, he said. Sheriff Pat had an idea. Why don't you build the dam alongside the river rather than across it? That way you can make a new bank for the river. Can I look after the bank? Asked Raccoon. I've always wanted to be a bank manager. That's even better than being a bandit. Sheriff Pat had to admit that Raccoon did look like a bandit. Mr. Otter the Beaver was already building a dam, and soon the bank would be back in place. Sheriff Pat was pleased he'd solved the problem, and he stomped back to the town of Bynum. When he got back into town, he saw that everyone was standing outside the library, and everyone was looking very worried. Sheriff Pat, said the librarian, Miss Gordon, it's Billy the Kid. He's inside the library and is eating the books. This was bad, Sheriff Pat thought. Billy the Kid was a ruffian, and he was a rapscallion, and he was a rascal. He did bad things. He had to be caught. Sheriff Pat thought long and hard. Then he thought hard and long. This was harder than the maths tests he had to do when he was at dinosaur school. Then he had an idea. He stretched his long neck to the baker's shop, and a brontosaurus has a very long neck, and he asked them for the biggest bun they had. Then he stretched his long neck to the gardening shop and asked if he could have a hole. When he got the hole, he carried it out and put it in the middle of the street. Sheriff Pat stretched his neck out to the rug shop and asked for the biggest rug they had. He put the rug over the hole and kicked some dirt over the rug so it didn't look like a rug, but just looked like part of the street. Then he carefully stretched out his head and he carefully put the bun on the rug over the hole. Then he stood back a little and called out, Mr. Billy Goat Gruff, he called. Billy the Kid heard and he was cross. He hated being called Billy Goat Gruff. Billy Goat Gruff was a completely different goat from a completely different story. He came out of the library to find out who had called him that. Mr. Billy Goat Gruff, Sheriff Pat said, you've been a very bad kid. You've been very naughty. I'm going to have to put you on the naughty step. No, you won't, said Billy the Kid, because I'm too fast to be caught, so you can't put me on the naughty step. Is that a bun I see there? Sheriff Pat waved his head from side to side nonchalantly. He knew Billy the Kid was always hungry, and he would not be able to resist a bun. That's my bun, Sheriff Pat said. It is my delicious, scrumptious, wonderful tasting bun. I want to eat it, said Billy the Kid. It's my bun, replied Sheriff Pat. You can't eat it. Billy the Kid stared hungrily at the bun. I can if I get there first, he said. Sheriff Pat looked hard at Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid looked hard at Sheriff the Pat. They stared at each other. Finally, Sheriff Pat spoke. I'll beat you to the bun. All right, Billy, go for your bun. Billy rushed forward and grabbed the bun with his teeth. Then he looked at the ground. He saw that the ground was, in fact, a rug. Then he realized the rug was over a hole. Then he realized that he was standing over a hole with no ground beneath his feet. Oh no, he cried out as he fell into the hole. Oh yes, said Sheriff Pat. Billy the Kid looked up out of the hole. He was trapped. It was too deep to jump out of, and the walls were too steep to climb, even for a goat. Oh, Billy said, I'm hungry. Sheriff Pat looked down into the pit. We've got some mashed potatoes, he said, but you must promise to be good. I love mashed potatoes, totally love them. If I can have mashed potatoes, I'll be good and help you. and that was how Billy the Kid became Sheriff Pat's deputy. And everyone called him the Mashed Potato Kid because he loved it so much. This was their first adventure. Thank you.
That was hilarious. I think that rivaled Terry Pratchett. So, David, we were in an orbiter together back in the 90s or so, and now you're a publisher of children's fiction. So have you always had an interest in writing fiction for children?
Not particularly specific for children. The way I moved into writing for fiction was back in 2020 during COVID lockdown, which I think you all might remember. I managed to get cancer and was getting treatment for cancer, and I was going into the hospital for treatment, and I saw when I saw lots of children also getting treatment, and it's kind of heartbreaking to see children in wheelchairs with bald heads and all the things there. And it was that I wanted to do something. My son had pointed out that I'd been complaining about how useless most publishers were, and the fact that I had been saying I could do a better job than that. And it was well, you've been saying this, why don't you? So I said, well, if I pull through from this, I will. So I did, and I started up, and medically I can't do anything for them, but it's my way of giving a little bit of there.
Yeah.
I take a copy of each book I publish down to the children's ward at Royal Marsden there for them. But, as I say, it's little enough that I can do, but it's an awful lot of fun. And I've got into writing for children and young adults up to the age of about 16. I occasionally turn my hand to adult fiction, but that's getting further and further apart.
Yeah.
And I have to say, children are a great audience. The feedback they give you is terribly honest.
Yeah.
You don't get any of this nonsense about, well, it was good in parts and it was there. If they like it, they will say they liked it, and if they don't like it, they will say that they didn't like it. And that's what you want from in feedback. What works, what doesn't work.
Yeah. From your target audience.
Absolutely, yes. And now I work as a TA at a school there. I get the children there. I've actually started up a new project. I'm running an after-school club for the older children there, the years 5s and 6s. And basically, we're using that to write a book together. There. First one of that is due to be coming out as soon as my cover artist finishes producing the cover, which is there, which they're going to, I'm the editor and they're the contributing authors.
Fabulous. That sounds absolutely great as a project. Brilliant.
It's an adorable story. It's really cute.
It really is good. Yeah. It's just a completely different view of it.
Yes,
brilliant choice of name.
I also tend to, I mean, obviously, Sheriff Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, for those of you who know the American history, has a lot of meaning. And the reason I chose Bynum in Montana is that's near where the big dinosaur fields were done.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, and I gather that the biggest dinosaur museum in the world is actually in Bynum. So that chose the location for me.
Yeah, no, great. That's brilliant. So now please unmute yourselves and put your hands together for David Flynn of Sergeant Frosty Publications. Teeth won't work. And Sheriff Pat, Brontosaurus Cowboy. Right, okay, so the next reader that we have is Alan, who is returning for another session. He has with him a medley of recently published poetry and flash fiction. So Fiction Fix started in a pub in Peterborough where there's a huge and popular poetry scene. So we haven't gone the poetry route, but it will make a nice change from fiction this time around. So let's join Alan Ashley as he takes us on a magical mystery tour with a selection of his most recently published poetry and flash fiction. And many thanks for muting yourselves during the reading. Take it away,
Okay.
Maestro.
Right, thank you. Yeah. Okay, yes, I'm going to read a few pieces that have been published recently.
Yeah.
This was in the online American magazine called The World of Myth. This piece is called Indica. I don't normally do footnotes, but I do actually have a couple for this. So these are the footnotes. It's inspired by the exhibition Yoko Ono Music of the Mind, which was on at the Tate Modern in London from the 15th of February to the 1st of September this year. Also, John Lennon and Yoko Ono first met at Indica Gallery in London on the 7th of November 1966. So this is Indica. Petite Japanese artist with a waterfall of black hair has exhibits that gallery goers can help to fill in, either on the spot or by imagining. Gift of the Gab Scouser musician takes a bite from an apple, offers imaginary money to hammer in a nail, and they each recognize a kindred spirit. 1960s counterculture pivots as he bites and she delights. Yoko likes to paint things white. After bed-ins, there will be together time at a mansion with white shutters on the windows. She lets in the light and joins him at the grand piano, where John invites us to imagine that there is no heaven, just 9 years before he departs. Thank you. Okay, I expect we've all got a poem or story like this next one. This one had been round the block for, whisper it, at least 10 years. And finally placed it in a magazine called Pulsebeat Poetry Journal. It's one I've read at loads of readings and people always like it. But finally it's been published, so there we go. This is called Dawn Chorus. What message do the birds convey as with their song they greet each day? A bright hello or go away? At 6 or 7, I'd hear their calls defending trees or garden walls, too early yet to rise for school. Then, swapping home for student flat, the burning toast, the bacon fat, the toilet flush, a screeching cat, a sounds and smells that bid me rush to throw on clothes, to wash and brush, to hurry for the campus bus. Soon, squeezing onto early trains to trust my instinct to my brain, to gamble on the stock exchange, the ringing phone's diurnal trill, this stealing the eternal thrill, sustained by caffeine, coke, and pills. And then my own children arrived, early mornings, broken nights, pierced the dawn with needy cries. Feed us, change us, bring us plenty, help us grow, make us ready, till at last the nest is empty. I'm bedbound now. I'm older, fatter, awakened by the nurse's chatter, a squeaking trolley of bedpans clatter. Another day to be endured, the smell of piss, the stench of turds. I wish I could still hear the birds.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, here's another one that's been in the World of Myth. It's in the most recent issue, in fact, and this is called Sis, No Sis. She says, all these years and you're still reading books with spaceships on their covers. And I say, well, sis, it's been a multi-generational flight. She's on a roll now about me living in the past. So I admit that I have a tendency to collect releases from the Neil Young archives, famous gigs he did, solo or with the horse. No, I didn't attend most of them. Hey, she says, you should come to our local karaoke night. I remember you doing Moondance all those years ago. And I don't tell her that the last few times I've struggled to rein in my mate Tell and his tendency to choose age-inappropriate material about greeting schoolgirls or eyeing up 17-year-old wallflowers. As if sibling mind reading, Sis says, I just sing the words, I don't do a PhD on them. Sure, it's just pop music, ephemeral, I answer, but then I worry that we're building too many bridges. I love Bowie, I add, but I get sick of Heroes. Great intro, but the performance borders on the histrionic. And saying this will probably get me thrown out of every Facebook group known to humankind. And she says, can I send you a friend request? Of course she can, but we're not friends, and we won't be again. We're Churchill and Stalin navigating the craters and foxholes of the sibling battlefield, meeting up in the peace carriage to maintain a fragile truce. I see her onto her train, put family matters onto the back burner, get on with real life. Okay, right. This one was in a magazine called Once Upon a Crocodile. And this is called From the Eye of the Beholder. What can I do for you, madam? Simple wash and set? No problem. Yes, I'm a highly trained hairstylist, been doing the job for eons. No, the snakes don't bother me. I've taken on a few commissions in my time, rinsed and combed the golden fleece, plaited the mane of Pegasus, and he was a lively one, I can tell you. In fact, I've dealt with snakes on the skull before, another couple of ladies. Oh, those were your sisters. Always nice to get to know the family. So, Miss Medusa, was it? Are you just keeping up appearances or getting ready for a special occasion? Oh, yes, I've heard of Perseus. The girls at the wine club say he's a bit of a dish. Little on the young and brawny side for my tastes, if you'll excuse my impertinence. Yes, I can spray some lacquer if you like. It will calm down those charming little serpents. Planning any holidays, my dear? Oh, that's nice. A jaunt around the islands is always most refreshing. Now, if I hold up a second mirror here, you can see how things shape up on top and at the back. All good? You ask whether you are beautiful, ugly, or striking, Madam Medusa. That's not for me to say. You're my customer and I value you. Besides, perhaps parting company with Plato here, I've always believed that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Yes, it's cash only, Athenian drachmas preferred. Please don't be insulted if I bite the coins to check their solidity. I've had one or two clients try to pass off fake currency over the years. And there we are, the Parthenon on that side and the head of dear old Zeus on the obverse. Oh, my dear lady, I've got no intention of turning to stone anytime soon. Would be such a waste, as I'm a veritable mistress of the sense of touch. Had to become so, been as blind as Tiresias for many a year. Oh, a tip as well. Thank you. May Artemis bless all your battles. Okay, just a couple more. This one was also in the world of myth. This is called Social Media Reacts to My Death. Social media reacts to my death. A few kind people post sad or care emojis on Facebook. And if you want to make it laugh or angry, I'm in no position to stop you. I still don't merit a blue tick on Twitter that's now called X. I never really sought verification, justification, or any sort of shun. An unexpected alliance of family and friends starts a GoFundMe page to bring me back from Hades, heaven, limbo, or the North Middlesex Hospital. For a £5, you can sponsor an ear or 2 fingers. The stretch goal is a couple of thousand, which might restore my heart, my soul, my intellect. All donations are strictly voluntary. Okay, and at poetry readings, you gave me a lovely R on my first poem. All poets want what they call the poetry R, which is where you read a piece and people are moved by it, and a few people go, like that, and they're reflecting on it, and that's lovely. I don't care for that. I like the poetry groan. So I'm trying for the poetry groan here. So if you can groan at the end, please do so. Here we go. This is called My Snake. This was in a magazine called Pause for Pause. My Snake. This week on the curriculum, we're bringing in our pets from home. I had to get a lift from Mum with heat lamp and vivarium when Friday came. That was my turn. And these are all the things I've learned. My snake quite likes the schoolkeeper and scooted up his ladder. My snake's not good at geography. At history, he's badder. My snake can't spell or smell or tell. He's just a little adder. That's your lot.
Oh, that's fabulous, actually. Okay, well, please, everybody, unmute yourselves now and let your hands do the talking for Alan Ashley. It's a selection of poetry and flash fiction.
Yeah.
That made me laugh all the way through, honestly. That was so funny.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, really good. Okay, so next up we have Dale, all the way from America, and he has a humorous crime caper to share with us. So please now show your appreciation for Dale E. Lehman reading an extract from his story, Rooftop Sonata. It's a most intriguing cover, Dale.
Yes, this is the cover, if you can see it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll save the interesting stuff for after the reading. However, this is the second novel in a series. The first one is Weasel Words. It stars Bernard and Melody Earls, a husband and wife team of thieves who rob from the rich and give to themselves. So this is the first two scenes from Rooftop Sonata. And I'm going to change my glasses so I can see it better. Chapter 1, Saturday, October 14th, 2017. She's got the body of Venus de Milo, but with more arms. The words spilled out in a breathless rush, as though the man uttering them had plucked the greatest treasure in the world from the rarefied air of a little art gallery. Maybe he had. The exhibit featured no big names, but the on display were all by up-and-coming artists, young visionaries poised, so the program claimed, to upend our ideas of beauty, culture, relevance, and ourselves. But no, the man admiring the epitome of feminine beauty wasn't entranced by a sculpture, not a stone sculpture at least. His eye was on, "Don't look now," Bernard Earls whispered to his wife Melody, "but you have yet another admirer." "Really?" Melody pirouetted like a ballerina, her beautiful auburn hair sailing in a breeze of her own making, her beautiful blue eyes sweeping the gathering until they locked with the wide brown eyes of a dumpy fellow whose jaw must have come unhinged. The guy had a friend, a bit less dumpy but no less unhinged. He too was gaping at her. "I told you not to look," Bernard said. "We don't want attention." Which was a dumb thing to say because Melody could no more avoid attention than could a sun-sprayed mountainside draped in autumn foliage. With his arm about her, Bernard was the frame to her landscape, a dashing fellow in the mold of Johnny Depp, but a few inches taller, with a wave of brown hair cresting his crown and a devilish smile, when he felt like smiling, that made women swoon. Accidentally, though. Bernard had no desire to make any woman but Melody swoon. But back to the point. They didn't want attention. Probably Mr. and Mrs. Earls were in the wrong business. "Poor fellow," she whispered. "He looks desperate." "Oh, well." Melody finished her turn and ended up where she started, face to face with the serene mountain vista, gray ridges behind gray ridges fading into a sepia sky. The painting was small, 6 by 8, framed in translucent gray plastic. "Where are the trees?" she asked. "There aren't any." Bernard slipped his cell phone from his left trouser pocket and checked the time. "They should be calling us to the buffet in a few minutes." He put an arm about Melody's shoulders, pulled her close, kissed her hair. "Please don't get distracted this time," he whispered. They didn't have any children, but Melody managed an impressive look of motherly rebuke. "I only mean," he started to object. "I'm not the distracted one, Bernie. Look at this thing." She nodded at the painting. "It's boring." "It's a Samuel Weston." "Yeah, who?" "Samuel Weston, remember? Destined for greatness." "According to whom?" "They've been through this 100 times in the past month, but fine, they could manage one more go." "Mr. Jacoby." "And who is he?" "Come on, Melody, you know who he is. The guy paying us to nab it." "Uh-huh, why?" "To create notoriety. He already owns a few Westons. He thinks a theft will boost their—" "What?" Melody demanded. "Does Mr. freaking Jacoby know about art?" "It doesn't matter what Mr. freaking Jacoby knows about art. He's paying us $3,000 to—" Bernard glanced around. Why did he always let her get him wound up? Fortunately, nobody had noticed their conversation. Not yet. He ratcheted down the volume. To acquire it for him. Melody snorted, a rarity for her. She was too suave to snort. For that much, he should want something good, like that one over there. She pointed 3 artworks to the left where a black and white photo hung. See that? A group of naked people arranged to make a flower. Now that's art. Bernard pinched his eyes shut just for a moment. It may be art to you, but Mr. Jacoby is looking for an investment. Once this vanishes, his other Westons could be worth a small fortune. Regarding the Weston, Melody shook her head. He's no Frank Schlief, that's for sure. She had become enamored of Schlief's bold colors and sensuous lines a year or so back, and now she compared everything to his work. Bernard couldn't fault her taste, but he wished she'd cut it out. The point is, she continued, I'm not the distracted one. Both you and Mr. Jacoby are distracted by gold. Real art has value beyond money. Bernard pressed his lips tight and thought, fine, whatever, as long as we get out of here with the painting and without handcuffs. In hindsight, he really shouldn't have thought that. Although he hadn't spoken, he did inadvertently invoke the unspeakable law, to wit, as soon as you mention something, if it's bad, it happens. If it's good, it goes away. First, a monkey-suited docent glided into the gallery and announced in ringing tones, luncheon is served. Please join us in the adjacent room. The murmur of conversation waned for a moment, then guests began a haphazard retreat, rather like liquid sloshing in the bottom of a suddenly tilted glass. Bernard and Melody stepped closer to the Weston, allowing others to pass by unimpeded. Shortly, the room was empty save themselves. In one smooth motion, Bernard gently lifted the painting and secreted it in the largest of the pockets sewn into the lining of his suit coat. He buttoned the coat and tugged the material straight, then turned to escort Melody out the other door, the door not leading to the buffet. Except she wasn't by his side. She was 3 artworks down, lifting the naked flower people from the wall. No, he whispered. Let's go before... Ma'am, a new voice intruded. The docent had returned to lock up. Having caught sight of Melody with the photo in her hands, he approached, eyebrows raised, body tense, more than a little disbelief marring his otherwise handsome face. Melody turned her brilliant smile on the fellow, who halted, simultaneously alarmed and dazzled. The look he gave her was more priceless than all the art in the Louvre. How much? She asked. She turned the photo so he could see it better. The docent hadn't even registered Bernard's presence. Knowing he'd better play to Melody's lead, Bernard removed the Weston from his pocket and waited. The docent croaked something, cleared his throat, and tried again. 2,800? But I'm sorry, ma'am, it stays on the wall until you pay for it. We'll package it for you at that time. Oh my, I'm so very sorry. I didn't realize. She carefully rehung the naked flower people. The docent eyed the operation and the operator. How about that one? Melody asked, pointing to Bernard. Bernard slowly raised the Weston so the docent could see it. The man's eyebrows arched again, farther than before. 2,500, he said, but again, my apologies, Bernard said. He rehung the Weston and brushed off his fingers as though the painting had been caked with dust. Then he came to his wife's side, took her arm, and said, come, love, I'm hungry. He escorted her out, knowing without seeing that the docent watched them every step of the way, knowing that by the time they were out of his view, the only thing he'd remember was Melody's swaying hips. As they left the room, Melody turned a knowing smile on her husband. See, Bernie, she said, I told you the other one was better. Mr. freaking Jacoby, Bernard thought he might just call him that from now on, had a few choice words for the botched job and its perpetrators, after which Bernard decided he didn't really want Jacoby's $3,000 anyway. He had just delivered a savage finger punch to the red icon that terminated the call and was about to throw his cell phone through the balcony door when the demonic thing rang again, probably Jacoby calling back to continue his tirade. Bernard refused the call. Half a minute later, the phone rang again. He refused it again. It rang again. Snatching up the phone, he snarled, go to hell, Jacoby. Laughter, then a wrinkled old voice said, who's Jacoby? Bernard squeezed his eyes shut. You don't want to know. Who's this? Who's this? Why, Bernard, love, don't you remember? It was a woman's voice, not quite ancient, but getting there, somehow familiar. He was pretty sure he'd stolen something from her once upon a time, except his victims didn't usually call him love. She waited in silence for him to break his silence. When he didn't, she said, it's Dolly. Oh, God, not her. Dolly Madison Plaskett. You and Melody attended a couple of my debauches last year. Melody, who'd been in the bedroom, chose that moment to saunter up behind him and shove her cell phone in his face. What you think of this? She asked. On the screen, a burnished cedar chest glowed. A $1,300 price tag glowed beneath her. He pushed her hand back to get picture and price in focus. We can't afford that, he said. I'm not selling anything, Dolly said. In fact, I have a proposition for you. I only accept propositions from my wife, Bernard grumbled. Who are you talking to? Melody demanded. You don't want to know. If she's propositioning you, I sure do. Dolly laughed again. God, I've missed you too. Put me on speaker. Bernard sighed, but did as requested. To Melody, he whispered, "It's Dolly." Melody face-palmed herself. The Earls had good reason not to want Dolly calling. Several good reasons. First, she was an aging hippie who never outgrew the 1960s. Enough said about that. Second, they'd stolen a weasel from her family, a silver one, not a live one. And while Dolly ultimately found that hysterical, certain of her other siblings might have still be holding a grudge. And third, although none of the Plasketts ever figured out how the theft had taken place, nor how one weasel had morphed into three in the process, Bernard and Melody didn't care to be associated with any incident that qualified with theft. It wasn't good for their lifestyle. The proposition, Dolly said, isn't anything at all improper. Bernard wondered why they would want to listen in that case. She laughed once more. She was good at laughing, and added, "I can't believe I'm saying that." "So what is it?" he asked. "I have a friend who's interested in acquiring something of historical value, and she needs a go-between. Naturally, I thought of you." Bernard looked at Melody, who looked at Bernard. She held up her phone and waggled the cedar chest while arching her eyebrows. "So," Dolly finished, "let's discuss it over dinner. My place, 7 o'clock this evening." "I don't know why you," Bernard said, just to be difficult. Melody shoved the cedar chest in his face. "Don't be modest," Dolly said. "You have, what do the young folks say these days? Mad skills?" That was one. Wondered if it wasn't a different kind of mad. "All right," he said, "since you're feeding us, we'll stop by." "Wonderful. You like crab imperial, I presume?" Bernard liked anything smacking of emperorship. "Of course," he said. Melody liked anything yummy. "You bet," she gushed. "Then I'll see you at 7. Dolly disconnected without saying goodbye. Bernard looked at Melody. Melody looked at Bernard. "Think of the money," they told each other. "Okay," they both replied. Thank you.
Oh, wow. So please unmute yourself and let your hands do the talking for Dale E. Lehman and his novel Rooftop Sonata. Sorry, Sonata, can't say it. Rooftop Sonata, a humorous crime caper. That had me laughing all the way through as well. So, you know, this is going very well. Now
it gets a little bit better. It deals with a lost manuscript by the composer Richard Wagner that was last known to be in Hitler's bunker.
Oh, right. Right. So now I'm going to get Dale to come back and introduce our newbie author's book this month. So let's have first of all, a resounding Fiction Fix welcome for Kathleen Fine, who isn't actually here, but
here's her picture.
But yes, here's her picture. Let's welcome her. Okay, so Kathleen has written this book, which is called Girl on Trial, a novel, and Dale is going to read from it because Kathleen finds herself otherwise engaged. Okay, take it away, Dale.
Now, this is a rather short reading, so she did have a summary for me, and I'm going to kind of reorganize it a little bit just because I'm trying to get things straight in my mind here, and pardon me if I stumble over it because I am reorganizing things. So, Girl on Trial, a young woman named Emily. Emily is 16 years old. She is a junior in high school. 5 months before the story opens, she was involved in an incident which has caused her to be charged with manslaughter for the killing of a family of 4. Now, because she's one of the youngest females ever to be accused of such a heinous crime, this becomes a huge national, there's national attention on this trial. In the past, she's struggled to fit in at her school. She's been kind of awkward. Her family situation is not great. And she has been trying to fit in somehow. Well, when she enters 11th grade, that's her junior year in high school, the first day she meets a popular girl named Hannah. And as soon as she is Hannah's friend, suddenly she's a part of the cool crowd. Unfortunately, that Hannah also introduces Emily to drugs and alcohol. And Emily starts doing things that she just never would have done before, which ends up landing her in this situation. The media is now calling her last name is Keller. The media is now calling her Keller the Killer. And So this story is told in two parts. It's alternates between the past and the present. The past is all the events leading up to what happened, and the present is the trial itself. The audience, it's meant for mature teens, young or new adults, and basically any women in the 16 to 55 age range who like reading about adult issues, women who still like reading high school mysteries. It's a crime novel, of course. I have to say, although that was Kathleen's target audience, I picked this book up and read it, and I really enjoyed it. So men may enjoy it too. It is kind of a young adult women's kind of fiction, but it's also very hard as well. So it can probably interest people across the spectrum. So here is a piece of the opening of the trial that Kathleen gave me to read. Emily was hyper aware of everything around her in the courtroom as she waited for the judge. The air conditioning vent whistling and blowing frigid air against her arms above her, the sound of Valerie's pen scratching at her notepad, the hacking cough of someone behind her. Emily, Sophie's voice whispered in her ear. Emily opened her eyes and turned suddenly. No, that wasn't Sophie, Emily told herself, just your imagination. She peered over at the prosecutor, Mindy Rosenbaum, who Valerie told her was going to rip her a new one. For sounding so frightening, she was a skeleton of a woman, only about 5 feet tall. Her raven black hair was cut so crisply across her chin it looked like a wig. As the judge and jury were called into the courtroom, Emily rose from the stiff wooden chair and glanced down to her ankle monitor. The judge was a heavy-set man with a neatly trimmed white beard and glasses. Judge Wilson cleared his throat. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Calling the case of the people of the state of Maryland versus Emily Keller. Are both sides ready? Emily watched as the judge took off his glasses and checked the lenses, using the hem of his robe to wipe away some smudge. Ready for the people, Your Honor, Mindy said. Ready for the defense, Your Honor, parroted Valerie. Judge Wilson faced the jury. Will the clerk please swear in the jury? Emily watched as the clerk walked in front of the jury, following the judge's orders. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please stand and raise your right hand. Do each of you swear that you'll fairly try the case before this court and that you'll return a true verdict according to the evidence and instructions of the court, so help you God? Please say I do. The clerk said monotonously. I do, the jury declared in unison. You may be seated, the clerk said, pivoting back to his spot next to the judge. Emily watched as Mindy pushed her chair out and walked with wide steps over to the jury. She approached them with practiced ease. Good morning, Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is Mindy Rosenbaum, and I represent the state of Maryland in this case. On November 9th, 2018, the defendant committed the crime of manslaughter for the entire Thomas family of 4. Emily couldn't help but notice that she spoke with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before, from someone who'd sent thousands of guilty criminals to prison, from someone who'd probably sent her to prison. Let me remind the jury that manslaughter is defined as a killing that stems from a lack of intention to cause death, but involving an intentional or negligent act leading to death. She paused for a second and glanced over at Emily. Emily felt the room begin to spin as Mindy's eyes blazed a laser through her skull. She bit the inside of both of her cheeks, trying to remain calm. Mindy held her hand loosely behind her back, and Emily could hear the dangling of a charm bracelet on her wrist that she hadn't noticed before. Clang, clang, clang. Don't be fooled by the appearance and age of the defendant. If you look back in criminal history, there have been many young women who've committed horrendous crimes. Unfortunately, criminals are not one age, race, or face, so there is no way to tell if someone is a criminal by looking at them. They come in all shapes and sizes, and you must remember that when listening to the evidence during the next few days. Regrettably, during this hearing, you will not be able to hear from the 4 victims of the crime because all 4 have brutally died due to the negligence of this 16-year-old girl. Instead, you'll hear from witnesses describing events leading up to the evening and the morning of the incident. Along with police testimony, I'll prove to you that the defendant, Emily Keller, is guilty of manslaughter. Thank you.
Oh, that is quite short. Yeah. Okay,
That's short.
fabulous. So, so Dale, can I ask a couple of questions? Because
You can. I'll try to answer.
yes, because obviously Kathleen's not able to be here. So what I wanted to know, this is her debut novel, yes?
This is her debut novel, yes. It did win an award after its publication. I can't remember which one it was, but it was good enough to win an award. So yes.
Brilliant. Okay. I mean, it's clearly nicely written, you know, so obviously. And did Kathleen have any special experience that helped her to come up with that particular story?
To be honest, I don't know, and I've always meant to ask her that, but I never have. We've only actually been in the same room twice in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And other things were occupying our attention then. The first time was when I met her, and I actually bought the book from her, and she was reluctant to sell it to me because she said, I don't know if you'll really like this. I think she wasn't thinking I was in the target audience, being a 65-year-old male as opposed to a young adult woman. But like I said earlier, it is a very good crime novel, in addition to dealing with a lot of difficult and emotional issues around teenagers, substance abuse. There's even touch on sexual abuse and things like that in the novel. So it's not, I mean, she says it's a YA novel, but there's adult level material in there.
Oh, okay. Well, it sounds like an interesting read,
Yes.
so that's great. I know it's available over here as well. So will you
Yes.
put some details in for Kathleen, or can I get them
Yes,
from her?
I've got both hers and mine, and I will put those
Brilliant.
in as soon
That's
as
fabulous.
we move on to you.
Yeah. So please show your appreciation for Kathleen's hard work and her novel Girl on Trial, and also for Dale for reading it. Brilliant. Okay, so we're getting on a bit with time, so I'm going to wind up the session with a reading from the Zardoth Imperative Clanship. That's this novel, which is a sequel to Discovery. Okay, so yeah. All right. And in this, I'm just going to get into a comfy position for sitting and reading. So we're going to follow the Zardothi into a gladiatorial event on planet Declane, eagerly watched by the Voth, who are pretty nasty species, let's say. The games arena, Duras Labour Camp, Declane, 12 to 49 p.m. And in Zardothi time, that's in 6. Jaffa's opponent got up. Uh-oh, Jaffa thought. Here we go again. The Kiai grabbed something from the ground. As he closed with him, Jaffa saw the rock in his hand. That's cheating, he grunted. As the Kiai swung the rock at his head, he swung up his left forearm to deflect the blow. Wasn't this supposed to be unarmed combat? Chibu told us to cheat, if necessary, the trooper said with a grin. I bet he didn't. Jaffa flapped his free hand in front of the trooper's face to distract him. Well, he told us not to let you humans win, or the Zardothi. Then he said something that sounded offensive and made to swap the rock to his other hand to try again. Jaffa couldn't let him completely move. He swung his hand downwards along the inside of the trooper's arm. As his hand made contact with his opponent's, he caught it. He stepped closer and twisted it. The trooper's arm bent and locked at the elbow. He kept his eye on the rock. The move bent the trooper double. Jaffa stepped closer in and rotated, pressed against the Kiai's arm to keep him in position. He closed his hand around the elbow, avoiding the spur, and pulled the trooper off balance. Okay, change of scene. Viewpoint. The young trooper took Chan's bow as an invitation to attack. He charged at her without warning, elbows extended so either would slash her. She looked up, aware of his approach, but remained in the bow until he was almost on her, then straightened and rotated away. He cannoned past her. She stamped on his foot. He tried to lift it, but failed and fell. She went in close and yanked him upright, then gripped his t-shirt at the shoulders. Sand fell from his uniform as he straightened. The Kiai youth wasn't expecting the move. Huh? He grunted. Chan thrust her foot between his ankles and twisted him. He fell heavily. He won't be used to this style of combat, so I can use simple techniques. And these guys haven't seen me fight before, so I have the advantage at present. This time she hung back and slipped into short fighting stance for ease of weight shifts. Knees bent, back straight, fists up, with a lowered center of gravity. He clambered to his feet. He has no idea of how to fall safely. He's probably winded by 2 falls close together. He already looked groggy. Chan kept her eyes on him as she moved forwards, then backwards. She shifted her weight between legs alternately. His breath came heavily, but settled as he circled her, much as she'd expected he would. Now he was more wary. Devan's opponent grabbed her arm above the elbow and moved closer. She smelled his foul breath. Of course, the Voth wouldn't understand the need for personal hygiene. Chan's training must have worked. The movements she had learned from her, along with the basics at JSET, had become instinctive. She thrust her foot between Kiai's legs, scooped around his ankle, and used her momentum to shunt him groundwards. The tipping point passed. Devan leaned forwards just centimetres to throw him. He landed on his shoulder and roared, winded. He was off the mat now. Now Devan knew he was angry. He's a male and physically stronger than me, so he thinks he should win. I've got news for you. She followed up her advantage, threw herself on him and knelt on his esophagus and punched repeatedly at his face with her free hand. One of his arms was pinned under her body where it couldn't harm her, but his other arm was free and he waved it about to try to stab her with his poison spur. The trooper, new viewpoint, the trooper squealed in pain and dropped the rock to use that hand for balance. Jaffa stepped forwards and loomed over the trooper. His weight was on one knee. He released his hold on the trooper's arm and gripped his hand instead. Then he leaned forwards and embedded his left shoulder in the trooper's armpit. This let him apply a foot sweep and take his opponent's legs from under him. The trooper yelped in surprise as he toppled. Ah! But he turned the movement into a forward roll and bounced up on the balls of his feet. He pivoted to face Jaffa just as he slipped back into the short fighting stance. Chan advanced on her right leg. The Kiai youth wiped away the blood and straightened. He's not done for yet, she thought. He skipped forwards and aimed a punch at her face and hissed and sneered as best he could with a broken nose. As he closed with her, he brought his other arm up to slash her with his elbow spur. Chan stepped back and angled herself to the right. The rotating forearm block deflected the blow outwards. She struck his chin with the palm of her hand, then pivoted on one leg and drove her knee into his groin. The Kiai collapsed onto his knees. How'd you do that, Zardothi bitch? He ground out through gritted teeth. If we ever get out of here, I'll show you. Chan bobbed backwards and grinned. Little advice, don't let it get personal. If anything, that angered him more. He charged towards her, one fist extended for a head punch. Eddie slid into cat stance, weight on his back leg. His opponent perched on tiptoe, ready to spring. When he did, Eddie met him with the lightning groin kick. His shin made contact with the trooper's groin area. His knee plunged into his chest. Ugh, the man grunted, but he stayed upright. The hardness of the impact surprised Eddie. The Kiai must be strongly built. He launched himself backwards and took up back stance. The Kiai threw a punch at him, but Eddie rotated his arm to deflect the blow. Then he launched his own MP elbow strike at the hinge of the trooper's jaw. Bone crunched. Out of the corner of his eye, Jaffa noticed Ayar's first opponent was down. Another took his place. Still, we're doing okay at this, and they don't know how to deal with this fighting style. He returned his attention to his opponent. The trooper sprang at him, fist extended. Jaffa raised both fists and rocked onto his toes with one foot. raised his knee and moved into the back stance. Most of his weight fell on his rear leg as he hammered down to deflect the trooper's attack. His right fist balled as he swung it like a scythe to thud against the PI's lowest ribs. Perfect move. But the trooper's rib was harder than he'd expected. Numbness dislocated all sensations in Jaffa's fist and forearm. He raised and swung his arm in a circle that ended at the PI's neck. He intended to apply a chokehold, but his arm didn't work. His numb hand couldn't grasp the man's windpipe. Before he knew it, the trooper had swung his arm up in a punch to Jaffa's jaw, coupled with a foot thrust between his legs and hooked around his calf. Clumsy execution, yes, but the attack's speed and brutality somersaulted Jaffa. I don't believe it. I've been tripped and thrown. His yell of surprise cut off as he hit the ground. He only remembered to slap the mat at the last second. Then the Ki was on him. He saw the man's hand, its cargo, the rock he dropped earlier. He felt intense pain from the blow the Ki crashed down on the side of his head. And it gave him no time or breath to say cheat before the arena dissolved and faded away. Thank you so much. Right, okay. Yes, don't forget to unmute. Thank you. That's brilliant. This is the final fiction fix, and I hope you listeners all enjoyed all of that. And many thanks to all our fantastic authors and readers. That's Carol, Pat, David, Alan, Dale, and Kathleen for joining me. Well, Dale twice, but Kathleen intentional. Authors, if you haven't yet done so, here's a reminder to please include links to your books in the chat or send the information to me afterwards, and I'll post them on my timeline, in the Finger on the Pulse, on my LinkedIn, and on my YouTube channel, Helen Claire Gould, and also on my website, so www.zarduth.com. For some reason or other, my teeth are not working very well now. Do include prices, ISBNs or ASINs, stockists, national, international and local, and your websites too. This has been Helen Claire Gould comparing Fiction Fix online and bringing to your attention both new and established writers in various fiction genres. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for joining us through the years as well. We'll have a little chat afterwards anyway, for 5 minutes or half an hour or whatever. So this has been the final show, but the live stream goes into, no, the live stream is not going to go into the Finger on the Pulse today, but we will post the recording in the Finger on the Pulse and also on my YouTube channel, Helen Claire Gould. You can still watch all the editions since we went online there. They're organised into a playlist. Thank you, Alan. And there are also playlists for my Poetry Sandwich live streams, book trailers, etc. on there. And I will be doing occasional chats with other authors and similar things. I like to keep my hand in, you know. So the Finger on the Pulse will be where they appear initially before being posted on my YouTube channel. And the Finger on the Pulse will stay as a group and a hub for posting information, news, upcoming events on subjects related to writing and publishing, and about your novels. So please feel free to do that there. Post them and I will approve them. So do check in there periodically if you're a member. And if you're a member and have a new book out, yeah, here we are. Please post about it there. I'd just like to say a big thank you to all the authors who have read for Fiction Fix over the years. I couldn't have done this without you, and you are all an integral part of my author journey. So much love and friendship to all of you, and that includes people not here today. So thank you so much.